Dr. Stone, when I saw you tonight, you showed me an app and you hadn't eaten in 44 hours.
44 wonderful hours of no food.
So why? I guess that's the question.
There was nothing in the fridge.
Okay, then that makes sense.
Hey there, I'm Mike.
And I'm Matt.
And I'm Jody. I'm just like you, except maybe not as smart or as attractive, but you know what I mean. I've got questions, but I have an advantage. These guys are two of my best friends who also happen to be doctors who are obsessed with longevity and human performance. So I'm going to ask them my questions. Things like, what's the best diet? How can I live longer and better? How can I get stronger and smarter? All the things you wonder and I wonder. And I'm going to record them. I'll do the work and you reap the benefits.
So I assumed that you were fasting for the medical benefits. And to be honest, it seemed like every time I talk to you, you're like on day 3 of a 5-day fast. You're doing this quite often. And you've got a ton of experience with it. You've read a lot about it. You know all the research. I really just wanted to have you on so we could pick your brain about this topic in general. And I hear people all the time talking about fasting, intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, alternate day fasting, prolonged fasting. There's all these different names. What's the difference? Is it all just kind of the same thing, or are there clear benefits for one over the other?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the reason why you always find me fasting is that I'm not an elite athlete like you or Mike Mallon. So I'm not, burning 7,000 calories just by sitting still and hanging out. So I have to try some different strategies to stay healthy. I think the terms are confusing. For me, I like to think of any time period that you're not taking in calories, that you're intentionally not taking in calories as fasting. And that could be brief, like what people will call time-restricted feeding, where you're not taking in calories for 16 hours and then you take in all of your day's calories in 8. That would be a 16-8 versus a 24 or an 18-6. That's all time-restricted feeding, but it's basically just brief fasting. And then prolonged fasting, I think of as something over 24 hours versus short-term fasting, which is less than 24. I think it's an easy way to break it up that makes some physiologic sense.
Yeah, so I'm glad that people can just hear you instead of see you, so they didn't see your eyes roll when you said elite athlete. That way, hopefully, some people will actually think you're serious when you said that, so I appreciate that.
I meant to say Olympic.
Oh, okay.
Olympic. Mike, what's really happening in the body during a fast? Like what metabolically is going on?
So, to understand what's happening during a fast metabolically, I think you have to understand what happens during the fed state metabolically. So when you take in food and, food fuel as calories, your body can't just utilize all those calories the second you take it in. So excess calories get moved into basically 2 main destinations. One is glycogen, which is just long chains of glucose essentially that your liver manufactures and stores. And then the other is lipogenesis, or de novo lipogenesis, where your liver basically makes fat from excess glucose. So this is why you could eat nothing but pasta and candy and low-fat foods and end up still getting quite obese and having a lot of body fat, is your liver will take that extra glucose and turn it into fat and kind of put it away for a rainy day, for when evolutionarily we've been exposed to periods of not having any food available and we need to live off our fat stores. So in a fasting state, in the first 24 hours or so, you're really just using glycogen. So you're using easily accessed glucose that can be taken out of the liver, cleaved up into glucose, and utilized by your body's cells for cellular metabolism, respiration, your cardiac function, and then any sort of exercise or anything you're doing.
Now you say for the first 24 hours or so, is that consistent with everybody? I mean, are some people more glycogen stores than others?
I think if you're on like a ketogenic diet or a really low glucose diet, you really are already glycogen depleted. So if you're already eating like an extremely low carb diet or especially a ketogenic diet, you're probably already deprived of your glycogen at that point.
So we're sort of assuming that like the day before I had, a pizza and 5 bananas. So I'm glycogen full.
You were glycogen rich.
All right. So then now I'm 24 hours out from being done with my glycogen before I move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point about, fasting has a lot of benefits, and we'll get into some of them, I'm sure, but probably, the main reason that a lot of people want to try fasting is for weight control. And, there's long-term cognitive benefits, there's insulin resistance benefits, there's cholesterol and inflammation benefits. I mean, there's lots of reasons why fasting's good, and it's been done by human beings for tens of thousands of years. But a lot of people look to fasting as a weight loss option, and I think this sort of glycogen issue is central to this, because if you're just using glycogen, you're in your first 24 hours. Let's say you just fasted for 16 hours, and then you eat again. You're replenishing your glycogen stores, and then the next time you fast, you're going to live off that glycogen, and then the next time you fast, you're going to live off that glycogen. And until you've depleted glycogen stores, you're not really using fat for fuel, and you're not dipping into your body's storage of fat.
But you're probably not creating as much fat too, right? I mean, so there's probably some advantage to using the glycogen as opposed to trying to fill a full tank, right?
And absolutely. And if you're eating somewhat low carb in the setting of time-restricted feeding or short fasts, you're probably still getting a lot of benefit out of lipolysis, out of fat burning. But let's say, you're like me. You've got genetic predispositions to being intolerant of saturated fat and being insulin resistant, and I can't be on a ketogenic diet because my lipids don't respond well. If that's the case, I need to be eating foods that at least have some degree of carbohydrate in them. I can't just make it an all-fat diet or predominantly fat diet. So for me, if I want to dip into fat stores, I need to get past about 24 hours for me to start doing lipogenesis and getting rid of my body's storage of fat.
Okay, so you've done a pretty good job of describing what happens metabolically, but what's the point? So tell me what benefits you're after. I mean, you mentioned weight control. Obviously, if you don't eat, you're going to lose weight more than if you're eating a lot. So that makes sense. But what are the benefits that you're doing it for? Your body composition is good. You don't have a lot of weight to lose. So why would someone like you be fasting?
Yeah, for me, so I probably the biggest reason I'm interested in fasting is lowering blood cholesterol and neurocognitive benefits in terms of Alzheimer's prevention. So those are the two things that I'm most interested in, although I got into fasting for prolonged periods after dealing with an injury that really limited my ability to work out. So I wanted to have weight control, but was injured in a way that I really couldn't do high intensity interval training or exercise to, the degree that I was used to doing prior to that. So what are the benefits? I mean, it's super simple. There's no complex rules. Like you don't have to be low carb or low sugar or low fat or gluten-free or vegan or keto or paleo. You don't have to think about what you can eat and what you can't eat. You just can't eat for a period of time. And you can drink plenty of liquids that are low or no caloric liquids. So
coffee.
Yeah, coffee's fine without additives. Green tea, herbal tea, tons of water, seltzer water, all of that's fine. And it's just really easy to remember. You don't have to check to see if something's on your diet or not. You do balance between feasting and fasting. So you don't have to have this sort of like, oh man, I broke my diet and I was on keto, but then I ate that, cup of blueberries, and now how long is it going to take me to get back into ketosis and all the negative self-talk that goes along with that kind of thing. You just fast for whatever you've predefined, and then you eat without, you're not eating junky food, but try and eat whole, unprocessed foods like we always recommend, but you're not counting calories in that period, and you're eating until you're satiated, and then you're going back into a fast again. And it's guaranteed to work. If you're like, what if you get keto, but you're not really losing weight, but you're measuring ketones and you're in ketosis? You can't really get that much more into ketosis if you're already eating a predominantly, fat-based diet. If you're taking medications and you're not improving your lipids, like there's a ceiling on how high you can go on your meds. There's a ceiling on how high fat you can go with the keto diet. There's no ceiling on just stopping eating for a period of time and then starting again. And, ultimately, insulin sensitivity, cholesterol management, inflammatory management, these are all benefits that you get out of fasting, and it's a really easy intervention once you ease into it and realize that you're able to do it. I mean, I think the single biggest thing that stops people from fasting is this base assumption of, I could never do that. There's no way I could go this long between meals.
So you said something right there that I think was really important to talk about, and that was the idea of easing into it. You mentioned a lot of different benefits there. So, I heard insulin sensitivity, improvement, decreased insulin resistance, improvement of your lipids. There was some weight loss. There was some cognitive improvement. So lots of different opportunity there for chronic disease management and longevity.
I didn't hear you mention autophagy, though. That's one that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely get into autophagy. So, autophagy is your body's own mechanism for cleaning up damaged cells or damaged cell parts. That's the easiest way to think about it. If it's a damaged cell, it'll go through something called apoptosis, which is a programmed cell death of that whole cell. And if it's a damaged cellular component or part of a cell, it'll be replaced during the process of autophagy. Autophagy tends to correspond with you depleting your glycogen stores, more or less. So you'll start to see some autophagy about 24 hours in, unless you're already glycogen depleted. And then you'll really see peak autophagy start to hit after about 2 or 3 days of fasting.
So all those things that Mike just read back, they sound great. Autophagy sounds great. But I want to know exactly, tell me logistics. For example, I've been fasting now for 7 minutes. So how close am I to autophagy and improvements in insulin sensitivity?
You're light years away from.
Seriously, then how long do I need to fast?
I don't think that we have the most compelling biochemical and certainly not the most compelling human data on when autophagy starts. I think if we look at stem cell production as a surrogate, so if you're replacing cells, you have to figure that you're getting rid of some of the damaged cells. If we look at stem cell production, I think it's pretty safe to say that by 48 to 72 hours in, you're really ramping it up. Some folks will get some degree of autophagy, I think as early as, I don't know, I'm making these numbers up, but around 24 hours, maybe a little bit before, a little bit afterwards, the process will probably start. I think you're probably not going to get autophagy if you're 7 minutes after your meal or 8 hours between meals. Right. I mean, if you're just eating dinner at 10 p.m.
The mouse models, if I'm remembering this correctly, were 12 hours in for autophagy. And we tend to think of, that mechanism being about half the life of, human metabolism. So probably 24 to 48 hours for humans is probably a reasonable guess, I think.
Is that really the only data we have? Is the best we can do for when we're going to be on autophagy mouse model?
How do you measure it though? I mean,
right,
it's not really measurable. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think stem cells that Mike's mentioned in the mouse model for autophagy is about all we got.
So probably 24 hours. You think? I mean, I feel like a lot of things I've read, and I've always felt like 12 hours maybe I start to get some benefit. At 16, I get quite a bit more. You really think that 24, 48, 72 is where you get the big benefits?
Well, I think, Matt, it's not surprising that you don't see a huge benefit because you're already essentially glycogen depleted. You eat a pretty high fat diet. You're in ketosis a lot of the time. You work out fasted a lot of the time. I think for somebody who's not living that lifestyle, but instead has a predominantly, or at least, 50% sort of typical carb-based diet who needs to deplete glycogen, I think there's no reason for, glucose and insulin levels will downregulate all of that cellular repair. That just tells your body that you're in a fed state and it can relax and just go ahead and do its thing. So if you're releasing glycogen from the liver and your insulin levels are still high and your glucose levels are high, that's not going to trigger autophagy. So for you, a shorter period of time because you're already starting in ketosis, that makes sense to me that you'd probably get benefit earlier.
And I realize we're talking about autophagy like everyone knows where it is, and probably most people do, but why is autophagy beneficial?
Well, the concept is that you're repairing damaged cells and that there's going to be some degree of not just cancer prevention by repairing early non-detectable cancer cells and eliminating those from the body, which your body's always doing through natural killer cells and other immune mechanisms, but you're also protecting against some of the long-term inflammatory conditions like Alzheimer's, like dementia and amyloid deposition and tau tangles.
Yeah, we frequently see patients with specific SNPs that put them at a little more risk for breast cancer or prostate cancer. And in those patients, I will frequently recommend intermittent fasting or more prolonged fasting more often.
Or leukemia too.
The JAK2 for blood cancers. Yeah. So those patients think it's even more important to do this. Who else is this really important for as just a medical intervention?
I mean, I think if you're looking at somebody who's significantly overweight, one of these things that I feel like traditionally in medicine, lots of folks who are overweight who have a hard time exercising because of weight-related conditions like, bad osteoarthritis in their knees. It's pretty hard to tell somebody to get up on a treadmill and walk when they're, have a BMI of 35 and it hurts just standing up. So in patients who have a hard time exercising for fitness, in patients who are significantly overweight or obese or who have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, I think fasting is one of the simplest things to unlock weight loss and metabolic control.
So there's definitely a group of people that it's going to benefit. I mean, I think that seems clear to me. Isn't there some risk associated with fasting? I mean, I remember, when I first got into medical school, like the concept was you should eat as many times during the day as possible, like small, like multiple meals, 7 meals a day, right? That was the idea.
You're going to wither away if you don't do
right,
that.
Right. Yeah, you're going to die.
For sure. You don't skip breakfast. It's the most important meal.
And it's interesting now that we're the pendulum has completely swung the other direction now, and we're talking about like, you probably only need to eat once a day, or once every 3 days. I mean, you just told me earlier today that you're doing this like 36 on, 36 off thing. So it seems like we keep pushing the other direction. Is it not dangerous?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of caveats around fasting that everybody who talks about fasting or who tries it out needs to understand. Number one, we're not talking about dry fasting. So you're drinking plenty of liquids. You're drinking enough to stay hydrated so that dehydration is not an issue. Number two, there are...
I've actually been waiting for that fad to start.
Dry fasting.
It's actually already
air only fast instead of a water.
It's actually already here. I don't think you realize that. Like the water fasting thing, that's actually in already. Like that. So MMA fighters do just that for weigh-ins.
In a dehydrated state.
No.
You're talking about
Yeah. No, people do train in dehydrated state as well.
Well,
yeah.
Have you guys heard of this small holiday called Ramadan?
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard of that.
Right, like I don't know, maybe a third of the world observes. It's so Ramadan's dry fasting from sunset to sundown to sunset.
I guess I'm waiting for intermittent breathing to kick in for that fad. So yeah, I'm
Intermittent
gonna have a 2-hour
oxygen.
breathing window each day where I breathe.
Intermittent oxygen.
Yeah, I mean, but all seriousness, like there are people for whom and situations where fasting's dangerous, right? So things that people worry about are things like dehydration, which won't happen if you're drinking water. Hypoglycemia really doesn't happen while you're fasting. Your body's really resistant to letting that happen unless you're taking hypoglycemic agents for diabetes. So if you're still on your medications, you cannot fast without having a physician supervise that fast.
Right. That's probably the one person that absolutely needs to like talk to a physician before they start fasting, right?
I think you need to be supervised and have frequent blood glucose measurements. If you're on diabetic medication, you have diabetes and you're thinking about fasting, that is not what we're talking about. And then there's other populations that really shouldn't do it at all. Children, breastfeeding women, pregnant women, people with low BMIs, people who are already like BMI under 20, under 19.5, people at risk of or who have a history of eating disorders like anorexia nervosa or bulimia. Like there are a lot of people where fasting is really not the answer, but there are so many people with diabetes or prediabetes, obesity, truncal obesity, hypertension, high lipids, metabolic syndrome, who would get huge benefit from incorporating even smaller, shorter duration fasts into their life.
And some people that just need to be more careful, like athletes. We have a lot of patients who, they're burning a tremendous amount of calories. If they try to fast, they're going to get relative energy deficiency syndrome, REDS. They're not going to perform as well. They're going to have some negative problems, maybe with their thyroids and their hormones. So some people it's going to be dangerous for, some people it's going to be great for, and other people just need to be a little more careful and use it at certain times.
Well, and I think that there's something worth mentioning about the athletes, which is one of the big concerns about fasting is muscle loss. Right? People say, I don't want to fast because I don't want to lose muscle mass. And it really doesn't happen. And maybe that's a separate podcast later. We'll talk about human growth hormone and what happens when you fast. But lean mass is actually really well retained. Your free fatty acid oxidation, your free fatty acid oxidation is actually significantly improved. So, and your norepinephrine or noradrenaline levels are higher. So you can kind of work out at a faster intensity or a bigger intensity and potentially recover faster and retain lean mass, but your overall performance will dip slightly. And I think, again, if you're an extreme athlete, that's something you need to be doing with some sort of coaching supervision or physician supervision.
Or you need to be thinking about doing it on the off cycle or something like that. I mean,
sure.
When you're on an on cycle, it doesn't make sense in my mind to fast. And I've seen athletes have pretty significant decreases in performance secondary to fasting. So for the most part, I don't recommend it unless there's a significant weight loss component to their goals.
So I'm going to be honest with you. I have no problem doing like a 16-8 window, even a 20-4 window, maybe even having my feeding down to 2 hours. But it's really difficult for me to fast longer than that. But I'm pretty consistent with the window. Is that okay? Like, can I just fast for 12 to 16 hours a day? What am I missing by not doing the more prolonged 3 and 4 day fast that you do quite frequently?
Well, so I should clarify. I don't do prolonged 3 or 4 day, water and liquid only fast frequently. I probably do it maybe once every 2 or 3 months. But I don't think you're missing anything substantial. You're already glycogen depleted. You're already really easily flipping into lipolysis and fat burning for fuel. So, in your case, I don't think it really matters. If you're going to do 16-8 or 24, you're probably going to get some of the autophagy benefit and some of the inflammatory benefit and insulin sensitivity benefit.
I guess I was asking for other people too. Are other people missing something? Because
I mean, I think so. Here's I think the essential crux of why fasting works is you're depleting glycogen and then you're getting access to your body's fat stores. When you have glycogen left in your liver, your body is going to use that glycogen preferentially because it's easy. It's much easier to cleave glycogen into glucose than it is to take a free fatty acid in the form of triglycerides and cleave the fatty acids from the glycerol backbone and then use the glycerol to make glucose. So your body is preferentially always going to go to glycogen. So if you're not glycogen depleted and you're just going 16-8 kind of indefinitely, you basically run down your glycogen, replenish it, run it down, replenish it. And maybe you're calorie restricting a little bit, which long-term caloric restriction doesn't really work either because your body adjusts its own basal metabolic rate to avoid losing weight. And you have to get past that glycogen phase. So to me, this is the difference between squatting 225 pounds 10 times versus squatting 22.5 pounds for 100 times. You're going to get a much bigger hormetic response out of 225 times 10 than 22.5 times 100. And I think if you can just push past that glycogen window relatively frequently, even if it's just a couple of times a week where you go 24 hours or you go 36 hours once a week, which sounds like a lot, but if you eat dinner at 8 and then you don't eat again until you don't eat the next day and then you eat breakfast the following day, that's 36 hours. So it's not a huge challenge to do. If you can do that, you're getting that much more vigorous response and you'll get better results.
So does coffee break a fast?
Oh man, do we really have to do that?
I get asked that question.
I already asked. You said no.
I think coffee's fine. I mean, you can, there's some really interesting work. If you look at like the circadian rhythm work that Sachin Panda does, then, yes, our cells may have their own intrinsic circadian rhythms and coffee may stimulate you to enter a metabolic phase. And if you drink coffee, but then wait 8 to 10 hours before you're eating because you're fasting, it may be suboptimal. I don't think it matters in this case. I think you can drink no calorie liquids.
If that matters, it's only got to be at like a couple percentage points, right? And I mean, if that's the difference between you actually doing a fast and not doing a fast, then it's totally worth it.
And it also doesn't bear out at all experientially for me. I mean, I can't imagine a life without coffee, and I don't want to. And I drink coffee all the time when I'm fasting. I probably had 3 cups of coffee yesterday while fasting.
One thing that I will say about coffee while fasting that I personally noticed, that I know you guys didn't ask this question, but I'll tell you anyway. No, I don't get the same effect, like difficulty sleeping, because my sleep is so much better during a fast. That's something that I don't know if that's worth talking about, but like sort of the physiologic changes that you notice during a fast, like what people can expect.
Well, before we talk about that, when anyone asks me, does coffee break a fast, what I immediately think, I don't always say this, but if I'm being honest with them, I say, you're asking the wrong question. You don't actually care if it's breaking a fast. You don't fast it for fasting's sake. What is your goal? If you tell me your goal, then I'll tell you if coffee is counter to it or helping. If your goal is to get into autophagy, there's a little bit of data to suggest that may even help. If your goal is to lose weight, it may actually help a little bit. If your goal is, if you're doing fasting for a spiritual reason, then yes, you're failing. If you're not supposed to, if that's part of the rules. If you're fasting specifically to improve sleep, then you're probably not going to help yourself with coffee. So does coffee break a fast is not the right question. Like, what's your goal with the fast? And then we can talk about what coffee does to it.
I agree 100%. It's largely why I groaned when you asked the question, because it's a common question and people want to know because people don't want to let go of their coffee. But when people are really asking that, most of the time, I find that they're asking, can I have coffee with a little bit of milk or cream or almond milk or wherever I'm used to putting in it, or sweetener, and does that break a fast? And I think if there's significant glucose in it, it probably does.
What about the sleep thing? Is there any data on that? I think that I hear that quite frequently, that people sleep better when they're fasting, but have either of you all seen any data on improving sleep other than just people's Oura Ring data that we're looking at?
Other than that, I haven't seen any compelling human data on sleep and fasting, although experientially I sleep like a baby when I'm fasting. But
I think there's some data suggests that you sleep better if you don't eat right before bed. So what ends up happening is when people are fasting and they don't eat right before bed, I think they sleep better. I will say that I think some people have more difficulty with sleep when they do a time restricted feed that involves a large meal at night.
For sure.
And I've had multiple patients who've had that experience. I personally have had that experience.
Yeah, people doing one meal a day, particularly, who then have like a 2 to 4 hour feeding window and finish eating at 9 o'clock at night or something, and then they're trying to go to bed an hour later with all of their daily calories in their stomach.
Right.
If you're doing one meal a day, it makes so much more sense to eat at 4 or 5 at a really early dinner, because one, it's just not so painful. And 2, you've got a little bit of separation.
And I think you clearly sleep better if you do that. I mean, if you haven't had any food in your belly for hours prior to going to bed, you're going to do way better in terms of getting into deep sleep, staying asleep, getting your heart rate down during sleep, improving your HRV. All those things seem to improve.
But it's hard, Mike. How can somebody start?
I think, right now, so many people in developed countries literally just take breaks to work and talk and sleep from eating, right? I mean, it's like a continuous stream of food just going in your face. And, we've been advertised to and marketed to and culturally appropriated to doing that. It's nobody's, I'm not trying to pass judgment. It's just the way that people are right now in general. I think that if you want to convince yourself you can do it, skip one meal, right? Eat dinner, skip breakfast, and eat lunch. And you just did a 16-hour fast, right? I mean, you finish dinner at 8 and then eat lunch at noon. And you can have your coffee in the morning, have some water, and literally just skip breakfast. So I think that's it. That's an easy sort of wading into the pool of fasting, is just do 16-8. And if that scares you, skip dinner and eat breakfast. I mean, if you're really like you need to eat breakfast in the morning and you feel like that's your jam, then, eat a late lunch and then eat breakfast in the morning. And I think if you can once you do that, it's pretty easy to start messing around with extending it a little bit longer until you feel comfortable doing a longer fast.
But avoid actual jam with all the refined sugar.
Yeah, no, you can't have jam. During the feasting period, you can have as much jam, I guess, as you want.
So what would be each of your number one kind of practical tips to make this the easiest for somebody starting out?
Water, coffee, tea, seltzer water.
So stay super hydrated.
Stay super hydrated.
Continue consuming
Stay
things.
super busy, right? I mean, if everyone's had this experience where you're at work, you're busy doing stuff, and you turn around and hours have gone by and you didn't eat, and your food's maybe in the fridge, or you were going to order something but you forgot, as opposed to the experience you have when you have a day off and unexpectedly you're kind of lounging around the house for a few hours and you're just going back to the fridge and the pantry trying to figure out if you should or shouldn't eat because you're just idle.
Yeah, I think the staying busy part is the most important thing for me, and just planning it out when you know you're going to be busy. Obviously, don't plan your fast during Thanksgiving or even when you're going to have a lot of people over and they're all going to be eating and celebrating. That's an important social aspect of food, so don't try to do that. Do it when you're traveling, for example, and you're by yourself, and it makes sense to not eat junk that's going to be available. Pick a good time to do it, and stay busy are the two most important things for me.
If you do it during, if you do a fair amount of air travel, there is no better situation than air travel for fasting, because your options for food are so abysmal that you can just stay hydrated, and by the time you are done leaving for the airport, getting to where getting through security, flying wherever you're going, getting to your final destination, you've probably already gone 12 hours.
And then you're staying busy because you're peeing so much because of all the hydrating.
And you still got to step over that person in the aisle seat, and
And we talked about this before, but you just feel so superior to people when you're flying.
Only when they come around with the food carts and the person
cookies.
next to you is having their sixth serving of food.
You feel so strong.
The thing I think is probably the most important, at least the thing that I tell all my patients, is to just make sure you really ease into it. Like, you want to make sure that you start off with, something reasonable, like a time restricted feeding, intermittent fast, skip breakfast, as Mike was saying, slowly push that interval back, get to the point where maybe you're down to one meal a day. And then once you're really comfortable with that and you're no longer feeling like those terrible hunger pains that last all day long, that's when you maybe dive into an FMD, fasting mimicking diet, where it's, restricted calories over a period of 5 days, or maybe you push to 2 days and see if you can go water only for 2 days and then to 3. You definitely don't want to jump into this head first. You really want to sort of ease in, because it is, for someone who isn't metabolically flexible, isn't used to using alternative sources of energy for cell metabolism, it can be pretty tough to jump in head first.
Yeah, I think just two things you said merit commenting. One, the hunger. So you will get hungry during a fast. If you think that you're not going to get hungry, then you're going to be surprised. You'll get hungry, but I think it's really important to realize that if you stay busy and you drink some water or some tea or some coffee, that hunger will pass.
Or you do 20 push-ups.
Or you do 20 push-ups.
Yeah,
That hunger will
all
pass.
kinds of things. Yeah.
It'll pass, and you'll have it again the next day, but it won't be really any different than the hunger you felt the first day. And most people say if you're going to do a prolonged fast, after the first 36, 48 hours, hunger is really not much of an issue. And that's been my experience, is that in the longer fast, it gets easier after the second day. The other thing is, I don't think I actually said this, or I don't think we touched on this, but if you feel like lightheaded, dizzy, ill, lethargic, like really unwell during a fast, just eat something and break your fast, right? You're easing into it. You're getting adapted to doing this sort of experiment. You shouldn't be pushing past superb discomfort or feeling ill. You should be, if you feel a little bit hungry, drink some water, it goes away. Keep going if you want, and that's in line with your goals, but you can't just keep pushing through if you don't feel well.
Yeah, same thing for intermittent breathing. If you do it, if you really feel like you need to take a breath, just do it. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it kind of annoys me that people always talk about the mental clarity they get with fasting, and it's there. It's true. I felt it. But if you're not used to it, like Mike says, you're not metabolically flexible, you're going to feel pretty bad the first couple of times you do it. And I don't hear people talk about that enough. And I think it's important to be honest with people so that they know they expect that and push through. They're not defective if they don't have that amazing mental clarity that people talk about, and that they just are on top of the world. It takes a little while to get to
It's like
that
hearing
point.
people talk about ketosis too, right? You hear people talk about keto, and people talk about, maybe you'll get the keto flu in the first couple of days, but then you're just going to feel so incredible. And I got to say, I've been in ketosis. I don't really remember it being incredible. I remember there were some mental benefits, but it wasn't quite what I thought it was at first. And I agree. I think don't be disappointed if you're not levitating in full enlightenment 24 hours into your first fast.
And I think that's very variable whether you get that full, mental clarity and the description that people often bring with ketosis and with fasting. I think some people get that, some people don't. And I think it's important to say that people that do get that is intermittently broken up by periods of severe hunger. So it's not like you feel amazing 24 hours of the day. So keep that in mind.
Do you have the dietary strategy that makes me feel amazing 24 hours a day?
That's the next podcast.
Yeah,
we're stay tuned.
Yeah, we got that. Sure.
Yeah. So subscribe now so you don't miss that. So I'd love to talk about this more, but I'm 28 minutes into my fast now, and I really feel like I need to go break the fast.
You probably do.
Yeah.
Hamburger.
We hope you like listening to the podcast as much as we like making it. If you think it's valuable, share it with somebody. Send to someone you think would really benefit and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Those reviews really, really help us out. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at WildHealthMD. If you didn't like, well, why are you still listening? Email us and let us know what we can do better. But the best way you can thank us for our time is to leave a review and share. Until next time.